Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I came home one evening to find my late wife's belongings. Her favorite sweater, the jewelry box she loved, even her journals gone. My mom had thrown them all away without asking me. When I confronted her, she didn't apologize. Instead, she told me it was time to move on. But what happened next? That was just the beginning. It had been 2 years since I lost my wife, Emily. 2 years of trying to figure out how to live with the hole her absence had left in my life. I kept her belongings in the house, not as a shrine, but as a source of comfort. Her favorite books, her cozy sweater that always smelled faintly of lavender, the little trinkets she collected on our travels. All of it was still there. It wasn't about clinging to the past. These items were part of the life we built together, and I wasn't ready to let them go. That particular day started like any other. Work was draining, the commute was long, and I was looking forward to unwinding at home. But the moment I stepped through the door, I felt a shift, an unsettling stillness, like something intangible was missing. I set my bag down and glanced at the living room. The bookshelf looked bare. I walked closer, my chest tightening as I realized what was wrong. Emily's books, the dog-eared romances she loved, the poetry collections she reread every fall, were gone. I checked the bedroom next, my pulse quickening. The chair in the corner, where she always tossed her favorite sweater, was empty. I threw open the closet doors, and my stomach dropped. The boxes of her belongings, neatly packed clothes, photo albums, keepsakes, even a box of letters we'd exchanged before we were married, were missing. My hands trembled as I searched the rest of the house, hoping this was some bizarre oversight. The more I looked, the more I realized her things were gone. My mind raced through possibilities. Had there been a break-in? But that didn't make sense. None of my belongings were missing. Could the landlord have done something? No, that was absurd. Finally, I called the one person I thought might have an answer, my mom. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Hi, sweetheart," she said cheerfully. "How was work?" "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Something's happened. Emily's things are gone. Did you see anything when you were here last week?" Her response was so casual it didn't register at first. "Oh, I took care of that for you. I thought it was time to clear some space and help you move on." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "You what?" "I went through the boxes and donated most of it," she said, her tone as light as if she were discussing the weather. "You've been holding on to those things for too long. It's not healthy." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Mom, those were Emily's belongings. You had no right to touch them." She sighed, as though I was the one being unreasonable. "Honey, I was just trying to help. You're young. You need to move forward with your life. Emily wouldn't want you stuck in the past." Her words hit me like a slap. The audacity, the sheer disregard for my feelings was staggering. "Where are they?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Where did you take her things?" "I told you most of it was donated," she said, sounding annoyed now. "The rest I threw away. There wasn't much worth keeping. I felt like I was going to be sick." "You threw them away? Without even asking me?" "You would have said no," she said matter-of-factly. "I didn't want to upset you, but I knew it was the right thing to do." I couldn't listen to another word. "Mom," I said, struggling to keep my composure, "I can't talk to you right now." I hung up before she could respond, my heart pounding. The gravity of what she'd done sank in slowly, like a dark fog rolling over me. Emily's belongings weren't just things. They were pieces of her, fragments of the life we'd shared. And now they were gone. I slumped onto the couch, staring at the empty bookshelf. Questions swirled in my mind. Why had my mom done this? How could she have thought this was okay? But one thought overshadowed all the rest, echoing in my head like a drumbeat. I'll never get them back. And just like that, the grief I thought I'd been managing came rushing back, raw and unrelenting. For the first time in 2 years, I felt the full weight of Emily's absence, and it was almost too much to bear. The drive to my mom's house was a blur. I don't even remember the route I took. All I knew was the overwhelming need to confront her, to demand answers, to understand how she could have done something so callous. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached, and my chest felt like it was going to explode. When I arrived, I barely had time to knock before pushing the door open. My mom was sitting in the living room, a cup of tea in one hand and her phone in the other, completely at ease. She looked up and smiled like it was any other day. "Hi, honey," she said, setting her tea down. "You look stressed." "What's wrong?" I stared at her, disbelief coursing through me. "What's wrong?" You threw away Emily's belongings. That's what's wrong. Her expression barely changed. She tilted her head slightly, as if she were trying to understand why I was upset. I didn't throw all of it away, she said, as though that made it better. I donated most of it to Goodwill. Someone else will get good use out of it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You donated her things? Without asking me? Without even telling me? She sighed, leaning back in her chair. Sweetheart, you've been holding on to that stuff for too long. It's not healthy. You need to let go and start living again. Emily wouldn't want you to be stuck like this. Her tone was so casual, so dismissive, that it made my blood boil. You had no right. I shouted, my voice shaking. Those weren't just things, they were hers. They were part of her life. Part of our life. How could you think you had the right to throw them away? My mom didn't flinch. If anything, she looked annoyed, like I was the one being unreasonable. I was trying to help you, she said. You're clinging to the past, and it's stopping you from moving forward. I thought if the stuff wasn't there, you'd have an easier time letting go. Letting go? I echoed, my voice breaking. Do you even hear yourself? You didn't help me. You blindsided me. Those things were all I had left of Emily. And now they're gone. Sweetheart, she said, her tone softening like she was trying to console a child. You don't need those things to remember her. She's always with you in your heart. I wanted to scream. That's not the point, Mom. You didn't ask. You didn't even give me a chance to decide what to keep. You just took her life and threw it away like it didn't matter. For the first time, my mom looked slightly uncomfortable, but she quickly recovered. I know this is hard for you to understand, she said, her voice calm and measured, but I was doing what's best for you. Sometimes, you have to make tough decisions for the people you love. Tough decisions? I snapped. This wasn't your decision to make. You don't get to decide how I grieve or when I'm ready to let go. That's not your place. She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. I'm your mother. I've been watching you spiral since Emily passed, and it's been breaking my heart. You think I enjoy seeing you like this? Someone had to do something. Her words stung, but they didn't justify what she had done. If you cared so much, I said through gritted teeth, you would have talked to me. You would have asked me how I felt instead of going behind my back and making decisions for me. The conversation went in circles for what felt like hours. Every time I tried to make her understand the gravity of what she had done, she dismissed it, doubling down on her belief that she had done the right thing. You're too close to this, she said at one point. One day, you'll thank me for helping you move on. I laughed bitterly. I'll never thank you for this. You didn't help me. You made everything worse. By the time I left, I felt completely drained. My mom's refusal to take responsibility for her actions was infuriating. But even more than that, it was heartbreaking. This wasn't just about Emily's belongings. It was about the utter lack of respect for my grief and my boundaries. Driving home that night, I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. My mom didn't think she was wrong. And that meant this wasn't the end of the conversation. It was just the beginning. The aftermath of my mom's actions rippled through the family like a storm. It wasn't long before the phone call started. First, it was my brother, James, then my Aunt Karen, then a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months. Each of them had heard some version of the story, and each had their own opinion on what had happened. Mom told me what she did, James said during one of our calls. Look, I get why you're upset, but she was just trying to help. She didn't mean to hurt you. She threw away Emily's things, James, I snapped. How is that helping? She didn't even ask me. I'm not saying it was the right thing to do, he replied, clearly trying to play peacemaker. But she thought she was doing what was best for you. Maybe cut her some slack. I ended the call before I said something I'd regret. The last thing I wanted was another lecture about intentions. It didn't matter what my mom had meant to do. Her actions spoke louder than any excuses. Some relatives, to their credit, were firmly on my side. Aunt Karen called to say how sorry she was and that she couldn't believe my mom had done something so thoughtless. I know you've been through so much, she said gently. You didn't deserve this on top of everything else. Her kindness was a small comfort, but it didn't change the fact that Emily's belongings were gone. My nights were restless, my mind replaying the same questions over and over. Why did my mom think this was okay? How could she not see how much pain she caused? The house felt unbearably empty. The empty bookshelf taunted me every time I walked past it, a stark reminder of what had been lost. Emily's sweater, her journals, the little keepsakes that held so much meaning. They weren't just items. They were memories, fragments of a life we'd shared. And now they were gone. My mom, of course, kept calling. Each conversation felt like stepping into quicksand. Every time I tried to explain my feelings, she dismissed them or turned the blame back on me. You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be, she said during one particularly frustrating call. It's a big deal to me, I shot back. You didn't just throw away stuff. You threw away her? That's not fair, she argued. Emily isn't gone because her things are gone. She's in your heart. That's what matters. I wanted to scream. You don't get it. You've never gotten it. Her tone softened, but it didn't feel genuine. Sweetheart, I know you're hurting, but holding on to those things was only keeping you stuck. I was trying to set you free. Free? I echoed, incredulous. You didn't set me free. You ripped away my memories without asking. That's not freedom. That's cruelty. Then came the moment that shattered whatever was left of my trust. During one of our calls, I asked about Emily's journals, small, leather-bound notebooks where she used to write everything from poetry to daily musings. They were some of her most personal possessions, and the thought of losing them made my chest tighten. Mom, I said carefully, did you throw away Emily's journals? There was a pause, then a sigh. I didn't think you needed to keep them, she admitted. What's the point of reading the same old thoughts over and over again? It's not going to bring her back. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. The journals weren't just old thoughts. They were a piece of Emily's soul, a glimpse into her mind and heart. I had planned to read them when I was ready, to feel connected to her in a way that nothing else could provide. And now they were gone. Do you even hear yourself? I said, my voice trembling with rage. Those journals were priceless to me. You had no right to touch them, let alone throw them away. I was trying to help, she said again, her tone defensive. I hung up without another word, my hands shaking. That was the moment I realized I couldn't trust her anymore. My mom wasn't just dismissive of my grief. She actively undermined it, believing she knew what was best for me better than I did. In the days that followed, I withdrew from the family almost entirely. Every call or text felt like a potential ambush, another opportunity for someone to tell me how I should feel or how I should react. Even the relatives who supported me didn't fully understand the depth of my pain. Losing Emily had been the hardest thing I'd ever experienced. And now, thanks to my mom, I was grieving all over again. Not just for Emily, but for the pieces of her life that were taken from me without my consent. The house remained quiet, its emptiness a constant reminder of what I'd lost. I didn't know how to move forward, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. The divide in the family was almost immediate. After the confrontation with my mom and the revelation about Emily's journals, I couldn't bring myself to forgive her. I couldn't even bring myself to look at her. But in her eyes, and in the eyes of some of my family, that refusal to forgive made me the villain. My brother James was the first to try to mediate. He called me late one evening, his tone cautious. Hey, can we talk? Mom's been pretty upset about everything, and honestly, so has the rest of the family. I sighed, already bracing myself. What do you want me to say, James? She crossed a line. You don't just throw away someone's things, especially not your late wife's, without asking. I get it, he said, his voice careful. I really do. But Mom didn't mean to hurt you. She just didn't know how to handle it. She thought she was doing what was best for you. I cut him off before he could continue. That's the problem, James. She thought she was doing what was best for me without actually asking me what I needed. This isn't about good intentions. It's about the fact that she disrespected my boundaries, and now she's acting like I'm the one in the wrong. James was quiet for a moment. She's still our mom, he said finally. She made a mistake, but she doesn't deserve to be shut out for it. Do you even hear yourself? I asked, my voice rising. She threw away Emily's belongings. Her journals, James. Her journals. How am I supposed to forgive that? James sighed heavily. I don't know, but I do know that holding on to this anger isn't going to help anyone. The more I thought about James's words, the angrier I became. Why was it my responsibility to move past this? Why wasn't anyone holding my mom accountable? It didn't take long for the rest of the family to weigh in. My mom had started making phone calls of her own, telling relatives her version of the story. In her narrative, I was the one being stubborn and ungrateful. She framed her actions as a selfless attempt to help me move on and claimed I was stuck in the past, unable to let go. When Aunt Karen called me again, her voice was hesitant. I don't want to take sides, she said, but your mom is really hurt. She feels like you've shut her out completely, and she doesn't understand why. She doesn't understand why. I repeated, incredulous. I've told her 1,000 times. She doesn't want to listen. Karen hesitated before continuing. I think she thought she was helping you. Maybe it was the wrong approach, but she didn't do it to hurt you. That phrase, she didn't do it to hurt you, was becoming a recurring theme. It seemed like everyone in the family was more concerned with my mom's intentions than the impact of her actions. The situation escalated further when my mom started accusing me of disrespecting her. "I'm your mother," she told me during one of our rare phone calls. "I raised you. I've always done what I thought was best for you. And this is how you repay me? By shutting me out. Don't you dare turn this around on me," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You don't get to throw away Emily's belongings, ignore my grief, and then act like I'm the one in the wrong." But she didn't back down. "You're stuck in the past," she said. "I was only trying to help you move forward. If you can't see that, then maybe you're not ready to move on." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just about the belongings anymore. It was about the complete lack of respect for my grief and my boundaries. My mom wasn't just dismissing my feelings. She was invalidating them entirely, acting as though she knew better than I did how I should process Emily's death. The family took sides as the conflict dragged on. Some, like James and Karen, urged me to forgive and move on. Others, like my cousin Emily, were firmly in my corner. "Your mom crossed the line," Emily said during one of our conversations. "It doesn't matter what her intentions were. She violated your trust, and she needs to own up to that." I wished I could believe that my mom would eventually take responsibility for what she'd done, but with every passing day, it felt less and less likely. The more she defended her actions, the angrier I became. Thanksgiving was the breaking point. My mom insisted that I come, saying it was time to put this behind us. I refused, telling her I wasn't ready to be in the same room as her. She called me selfish, accusing me of tearing the family apart. "You're letting your grief ruin everything," she said. "You're not the only one who's hurting, you know." That was the final straw. I hung up the phone and decided I couldn't do this anymore. If my mom couldn't respect my grief or my boundaries, then I couldn't have a relationship with her, at least not right now. The family might have been divided, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep compromising my own well-being to keep the peace. After weeks of silence, my mom called me out of the blue. Her voice was unusually calm, almost cheerful. "We need to talk," she said. "Can you come over this weekend?" I hesitated. Every conversation with her recently had felt like a battle, but there was something about her tone that made me curious. Maybe I thought she was ready to apologize. Maybe this was her way of trying to make things right. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived at her house that Saturday, I found her waiting for me in the dining room. She had set the table with coffee and a plate of cookies, as if this were some casual afternoon chat. The air was heavy with unspoken tension, but I told myself to stay open-minded. After some small talk, she leaned forward, her expression serious. "There's something I need to discuss with you," she began. "It's about Emily's inheritance." My stomach tightened. "What about it?" She sighed, clasping her hands together like she was bracing herself. "I've been thinking a lot about what she would have wanted. Emily was such a generous person, always thinking of others. Don't you think she would want you to use that money to help the family?" I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. "What are you saying?" She met my gaze, her expression earnest. "Your brother and sister could really use some help right now. James is struggling to save for a house, and Laura's been dealing with some medical bills. It doesn't seem fair for you to keep all of it when they're struggling. I think Emily would want you to share it with them." The room went quiet as I tried to process her words. "Are you serious?" I finally managed to say. "Yes," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Emily had such a big heart. She wouldn't want the money to go to waste. It's just sitting there, isn't it? This could really make a difference for your siblings." My blood was boiling, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Let me get this straight. You wanted to take the inheritance Emily left me, the one thing she specifically wanted me to have, and give it to James and Laura." "It's not just for them," she said quickly. "It's for the family. We're all struggling in different ways. You're doing fine. You have a good job, a stable life. This money could help everyone, not just you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, do you even hear yourself? After everything you've done, throwing away her belongings, dismissing my grief, you're now asking me to give away her inheritance? Are you serious?" Her expression hardened. "I'm not asking you to give it all away," she said defensively. "Just a portion. It's the right thing to do." "The right thing to do?" I said, my voice rising. "The right thing to do would have been to leave her things alone. The right thing to do would be respecting the boundaries I've set. But instead, you've decided that you know best, and now you're trying to guilt me into giving away something that Emily wanted me to have. You're being selfish," she said, her tone sharp. "This isn't just about you. It's about the family. Emily would want you to help." I stood up, my hands trembling with anger. "Don't you dare use Emily to justify this. You have no idea what she would have wanted because you didn't know her the way I did. This inheritance is all I have left of her, and I'm not giving it up." My mom looked genuinely taken aback, as if she hadn't expected me to stand my ground. "I'm just trying to do what's best for everyone," she said, her voice quieter now. "No," I said firmly. "You're trying to control me. You've been doing it ever since Emily died, and I'm done letting it happen." I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, but she called after me. "If you walk out now, you're only proving my point. You're letting your grief turn you into someone Emily wouldn't recognize." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't stop. I walked out of the house and didn't look back. That night, I replayed the conversation in my head, alternating between anger and disbelief. How could she think this was okay? How could she twist Emily's memory into a weapon to guilt me into doing what she wanted? It wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about the pattern of control, the constant disregard for my feelings, and the refusal to respect my boundaries. This wasn't love or concern. It was manipulation, plain and simple. As much as it hurt, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep engaging with her on her terms. If my mom couldn't respect my grief, my decisions, or Emily's memory, then our relationship would have to change, whether she liked it or not. Leaving my mom's house that day felt like crossing some invisible threshold. I had walked in hoping. Naively, I realized now that she might finally take responsibility for what she had done. Instead, I left feeling more betrayed and alienated than ever before. This wasn't just about Emily's belongings, or the inheritance, or even the endless justifications my mom used to excuse her actions. It was about control. It was about her inability or refusal to respect my grief, my decisions, and my boundaries. By the time I got home, I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep engaging with her, couldn't keep subjecting myself to her dismissiveness and manipulation. For the first time, I realized I had to draw a line. The next day, I called her. She picked up on the first ring, her tone already carrying an edge of expectation. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" she asked, skipping the pleasantries entirely. "I have," I said, my voice steady. "And I need to make something clear. I need space, Mom. I can't keep having these conversations with you." "What do you mean by space?" she asked, her voice sharpening. "I mean, I'm stepping back," I said firmly. "I won't be attending family events for a while, and I won't be answering calls unless it's an emergency. Until you can take responsibility for what you've done, for throwing away Emily's things, for disrespecting my grief, and for trying to guilt me over the inheritance, I can't keep having a relationship with you." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, her voice icy, "So that's it? You're just cutting me out because I made a mistake." "This isn't about a mistake," I replied, keeping my tone calm. "It's about a pattern. You don't listen, you don't respect my boundaries, and you refuse to acknowledge the pain you've caused. I can't keep putting myself through this." She scoffed. "You're being ridiculous. You're letting your grief cloud your judgment. You think cutting me out is going to make you feel better? It won't. It'll just tear this family apart." Her words stung, but I held my ground. "The family is already divided, Mom, and that's not on me. That's on you." She didn't respond right away, and for a moment, I thought she might finally understand. But then she said, her voice dripping with bitterness, "Fine. Do whatever you want. But don't come crying to me when you realize how selfish you're being." I hung up without another word, my hands shaking. The weight of what I had just done settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had always been the one to smooth things over, to keep the peace. But this time, I wasn't going to compromise my own well-being to maintain the illusion of harmony. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. My brother James called me that evening, his tone accusatory. "What's this about you cutting Mom out?" he demanded. "I didn't cut her out," I said, already exhausted by the conversation. "I told her I needed space." "There's a difference." "Not to her," he shot back. "She's devastated. She thinks you don't care about her anymore." I pinched the bridge of my nose, willing myself to stay calm. "James, this isn't about whether I care about her. It's about the fact that she crossed a line, multiple lines, and refuses to take responsibility. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not." He sighed heavily. "Look, I get that you're upset, but don't you think you're taking this too far? She's our mom. She's not perfect, but she's trying. You're tearing the family apart by shutting her out." Hearing those words again, tearing the family apart, made something inside me snap. "You know what, James? I'm done being the scapegoat for this family. If Mom wants to play the victim and blame me for her actions, that's on her. But I'm not going to let you or anyone else guilt me into going back to the way things were." James was quiet for a moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was softer. I just hate seeing everyone like this. I wish we could fix it. So do I said honestly. But I can't be the only one trying to fix something that's broken. Mom has to meet me halfway, and right now, she's not willing to do that. The conversation ended on an uneasy note, and I knew James wasn't convinced. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself further. The next few weeks were difficult. I stopped attending family gatherings, and the silence from some of my relatives was deafening. My mom made no effort to reach out, but I heard through the grapevine that she was telling anyone who would listen that I had abandoned her. At first, the guilt was overwhelming. I questioned whether I had made the right decision, whether I should have handled things differently. But as time went on, I began to feel a sense of relief. For the first time since Emily's death, I was putting my own needs first. I threw myself into my work, focusing on projects that brought me a sense of purpose. I spent time with friends who supported me without judgment. And I even started seeing a therapist to help me navigate the complicated emotions surrounding my grief and my family. Drawing the line with my mom hadn't been easy, but it was necessary. For too long, I had been trying to keep the peace while ignoring my own pain. Now, I was finally prioritizing my healing. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was beginning to move forward. Not because someone else thought I should, but because I was ready. It was during one of my lowest points that I reconnected with Sarah, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. We met in college and had stayed loosely in touch through social media, but life had pulled us in different directions. It wasn't until she sent me a message out of the blue, saying she'd heard about my situation from a mutual friend, that our paths crossed again. "I'm so sorry for everything you've been through," her message read. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." I've been down a similar road. Sarah had lost her husband 3 years earlier, and that shared experience created an instant bond between us. It wasn't the kind of connection I had with anyone else, not even my closest friends or family. She understood the complexities of grief in a way that only someone who had lived it could. We met for coffee one chilly afternoon, and what started as a casual catch-up quickly turned into a deep conversation about loss. I told her about Emily, about my mom, and about the mess my family had become. She listened without interrupting, her expression a mix of empathy and understanding. "It's like they think grief has an expiration date," I said, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly. "Like there's a point where you're supposed to pack everything up, tie a bow on it, and call it done." Sarah nodded. "People who haven't experienced this kind of loss don't understand that grief isn't linear. It doesn't follow a timeline. It ebbs and flows, and sometimes it hits you out of nowhere." Her words felt like a balm for my soul. For so long, I had felt isolated in my grief, as though no one truly understood what I was going through. But Sarah got it. She didn't just sympathize, she knew. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I talked often, sometimes meeting in person, other times exchanging long text messages late at night. She became a sounding board for my frustrations, a safe space where I could unpack my emotions without fear of judgment. One evening, as we sat on a park bench watching the sun dip below the horizon, I told her about the inheritance conversation with my mom. She actually tried to use Emily's memory to guilt me into sharing the money, I said, my voice filled with disbelief. "She said it's what Emily would have wanted." Sarah frowned, her gaze thoughtful. "That's not about Emily," she said after a moment. "That's about your mom trying to justify her own discomfort. She's struggling with her own version of grief. Losing you to your pain, losing the family dynamic she's used to. And she doesn't know how to deal with it." I raised an eyebrow. "So you think this is about her, not me?" "Partly," Sarah said. "It doesn't excuse what she did, but some people can't handle sitting with grief. Instead of addressing their own feelings, they try to fix everyone else's. It's easier than dealing with their own discomfort." Her perspective was like a light bulb moment for me. For months, I had been consumed by anger at my mom, viewing her actions as a deliberate attack on my grief and my boundaries. But Sarah's words helped me see that my mom's behavior, while hurtful, wasn't necessarily malicious. It was a reflection of her own inability to cope. That realization didn't erase the pain or make what my mom had done okay, but it did give me a new framework for understanding her actions. She probably thought she was helping, I admitted, though the words felt heavy in my mouth. Even if she went about it in the worst way possible. Sarah nodded. "Exactly. It doesn't mean you have to forgive her or let her back into your life on her terms. But understanding her motivations might help you find some peace." That night, I thought about Sarah's words as I sat in the quiet of my living room. The anger I had been carrying for so long didn't feel quite as sharp anymore. It was still there, but it was tempered by a deeper understanding of where my mom's actions might have been coming from. I wasn't ready to forgive her, Not yet. But I realized that forgiveness didn't have to be about excusing her behavior. It could be about releasing myself from the grip of my own anger, about finding a way to heal without needing her to change. Sarah's friendship became a lifeline in the weeks that followed. She helped me see that setting boundaries wasn't just about keeping people out. It was about protecting my own well-being. And she reminded me that grief was something I didn't have to navigate alone. In time, my conversations with Sarah gave me the courage to confront my own pain more directly. I started journaling about my memories of Emily, writing down the little things I was afraid of forgetting. The way her laughter filled a room, the way she always made pancakes on Sunday mornings, the way she would scrunch her nose when she was thinking. I realized that holding on to those memories didn't mean I was stuck in the past. It meant I was honoring the love we shared. Sarah's insights didn't fix everything, but they gave me a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. I couldn't control my mom's actions, and I couldn't undo the damage that had been done. But I could choose how I responded, how I moved forward, and how I continued to honor Emily in my own way. For the first time since everything had started, I felt like I was beginning to reclaim my life. The call from my mom came on a quiet Sunday afternoon, completely unexpected. I had been sitting on the couch, sorting through some old photos of Emily, when my phone buzzed. Seeing her name on the screen sent a wave of mixed emotions through me. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep the distance I had fought so hard to establish. But another part of me, the part that remembered the years before all this mess, hesitated. I answered, "Hi, Mom." Her voice was softer than I'd heard in months. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. There was a pause, as if she were trying to gather her thoughts. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from right now, but I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. I wanted to say I'm sorry." It wasn't the first time she had used the word sorry, but there was something different about her tone this time. It didn't sound defensive or rehearsed. It sounded real. "I didn't know how to help you," she continued. "When Emily passed, I thought I needed to step in and fix things, but I see now that I crossed a line. I took over when I should have been supporting you, and I made choices that weren't mine to make." Her words caught me off guard. For so long, I had been bracing myself for more justifications, more excuses. But this sounded like an acknowledgement of the pain she had caused, and that was something I hadn't expected. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I see now that I was wrong. I'm sorry for hurting you." The apology wasn't perfect. She didn't address everything, and I could still feel traces of her old habits, the way she framed her actions as misguided rather than harmful. But it was a step in the right direction, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope that reconciliation might be possible. "Thank you for saying that," I said cautiously. "It means a lot to hear you admit that." There was another pause, and then she asked, "Do you think we can talk? I'd like to see you. No pressure, but I miss you." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to protect the distance I had created, to keep the walls up for a little longer. But another part of me, the part that still cared, despite everything, knew I had to take a chance. "Okay," I said finally. "We can talk, but I need you to understand something. Things aren't going to go back to the way they were overnight. This is going to take time." "I understand," she said quietly. We met the following week at a small cafe near my house. The atmosphere was neutral, safe, a far cry from the tension-filled conversations we'd had in her dining room. When she arrived, she looked almost nervous, clutching her purse tightly as she sat across from me. The conversation started awkwardly, filled with polite small talk about the weather and her garden. But eventually, we got to the heart of the matter. "I know I've lost your trust," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "And I know I can't expect you to forgive me right away. But I want to try. I want to fix things." I nodded, my own emotions bubbling just below the surface. "I appreciate that, Mom. But I need you to understand that this isn't just about what happened with Emily's things or the inheritance. It's about boundaries. I need to know that you'll respect my decisions, even if you don't agree with them." She listened quietly, nodding as I laid out my expectations. I told her I wouldn't be discussing Emily's inheritance or letting her dictate how I grieved. If she wanted to be part of my life, she had to respect that. "I can do that," she said when I finished. "I want to do that. I don't want to lose you." Her words softened something in me. For so long, I had been carrying anger and resentment toward her, convinced that she would never understand the harm she had caused. But now, sitting across from her, I saw a glimmer of the mom I used to know, the one who cared deeply, even if her methods were flawed. Rebuilding our relationship was slow and cautious. I kept my boundaries firm, and she respected them, most of the time. There were moments when her old tendencies crept back in, but I learned to address them calmly rather than letting them fester. Trust wasn't something that came easily. It had been broken too many times for me to let my guard down completely. But little by little, we found common ground. We started having conversations that didn't revolve around the past, sharing small moments of connection that reminded me why I had cared so much in the first place. I wasn't naive enough to think that everything was fixed. The wounds were still there, and some of them might never fully heal. But for the first time, I felt like we were moving in the right direction. Looking back, I realized that the reconciliation wasn't just about my mom. It was about me. Setting boundaries, standing up for myself, and refusing to compromise my values had been some of the hardest things I'd ever done. But they were also the most necessary. This wasn't about erasing the past or pretending everything was fine. It was about finding a way forward one step at a time. And for now, that was enough. The weeks and months after my mom's apology marked a quiet but significant shift in our relationship. It wasn't an overnight transformation. There were still moments of tension, times when her old habits surfaced, and I had to remind her of my boundaries. But overall, she was making an effort, and that effort mattered. For the first time in years, she stopped pushing me to move on or telling me what Emily would have wanted. Instead, she began to ask, "How can I help?" It was a small change, but it spoke volumes. She wasn't trying to fix me or force me into a version of grief she was comfortable with. She was learning to listen, to accept that my healing was my own. One day, she even surprised me by mentioning Emily in a way that felt genuine and respectful. "I was going through some old photos," she said during one of our coffee meetups. "I found one of you two at your wedding. Emily looked so beautiful that day." Her words caught me off guard, but in a good way. It was the first time in years she had spoken about Emily without a hint of tension or awkwardness. It felt like progress. While my relationship with my mom was slowly improving, my focus shifted toward honoring Emily's memory in ways that felt meaningful to me. For so long, my grief had been tangled with anger. Anger at my mom, at my family, and even at myself for not being able to protect the things that reminded me of her. But as that anger began to fade, I found space to connect with her memory in new ways. I donated to a local charity that Emily had been passionate about, one that provided books and resources to underserved schools. It felt good to know that her values were still making an impact, even if she wasn't here to see it. I also framed one of her favorite quotes, a simple but profound line from a book she loved. "Even in the darkest times, there is light to be found." It now hangs in my living room, a quiet reminder of her optimism and strength. And though many of her belongings were gone, I found solace in the few cherished items I still had. A bracelet she used to wear, a handwritten note she left me on our anniversary, and a small seashell we picked up during a trip to the coast. I placed them in a wooden box on my bedside table, where they felt both safe and close. Letting go of the anger wasn't easy. There were still moments when it crept back in, especially on the hard days, anniversaries, birthdays, the quiet evenings when the weight of her absence felt unbearable. But I learned to sit with those feelings, to acknowledge them without letting them consume me. Therapy helped more than I expected. My therapist taught me that forgiveness doesn't have to mean excusing someone's actions. It can simply mean choosing not to let those actions hold power over you. That perspective changed everything for me. As I let go of the resentment, I began to feel lighter. The space that anger had occupied for so long was gradually replaced by something else: gratitude. Gratitude for the time I had with Emily, for the love we shared, and for the ways her memory continued to shape my life. My mom noticed the changes too. "You seem more at peace," she said during one of our phone calls. "I think I am," I replied honestly. "It's not perfect, but I'm getting there." She paused and said, "I'm proud of you." Those words, simple as they were, meant more to me than I could express. For so long, it had felt like she was working against me, trying to pull me out of my grief on her terms. Hearing her acknowledge my progress in a way that felt supportive, not controlling, was a sign of how far we'd both come. As the seasons changed, so did my outlook on the future. I started reconnecting with old friends, picking up hobbies I had abandoned after Emily's death, and even considering what it might look like to open my heart again someday. Through it all, I kept Emily's memory close. She wasn't just a chapter in my life. She was a part of me, woven into everything I did and everything I hoped to become. Moving forward didn't mean forgetting her or leaving her behind. It meant carrying her with me, honoring her in the choices I made and the life I continued to build. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to take those steps, one at a time, with her memory as my guide. Today, I can finally say that I'm in a better place. It's not the kind of better I once imagined, where everything feels resolved and life returns to what it was before. Instead, it's a quieter, more balanced kind of peace, where I've learned to carry both my grief and my joy without letting one overshadow the other. My relationship with my mom is far from perfect, but it's functional. We found a new rhythm, one that respects the boundaries I've worked hard to establish. She still slips up occasionally. Old habits die hard. But the difference now is that I don't let those moments derail me. I've learned to advocate for myself, even when it's uncomfortable, and to enforce my boundaries without guilt. She's also made an effort to meet me halfway. She doesn't push me to move on anymore. And when she brings up Emily, it's with a gentleness that wasn't there before. I think she's starting to understand that grief isn't something you fix. It's something you live with. And that understanding, while not perfect, has helped us rebuild a connection I thought I'd lost forever. Emily's memory is still a part of my life, not as a source of pain, but as a source of comfort and inspiration. I've woven her into the fabric of my daily routine in small, meaningful ways. The framed quote hanging in my living room reminds me of her optimism, while the bracelet she used to wear grounds me during tough days. I've also made it a point to honor her legacy in more public ways. Every year, on her birthday, I donate to the charity she loved, a small act that keeps her spirit alive and reminds me of the difference she made in the world. But perhaps the most important way I honor her is by living fully. For a long time, I felt guilty about moving forward, as though letting go of the pain meant letting go of her. But now I see it differently. Moving forward isn't about forgetting her. It's about carrying her with me as I embrace new experiences and build a future she would have been proud of. Grief has taught me many lessons, but the most profound is this. It's not a straight line. It's a winding, unpredictable path that looks different for everyone. Some days, it feels like I found my footing. Other days, the weight of Emily's absence hits me like a wave. And that's okay. I've stopped comparing my grief to anyone else's. I've learned that there's no right way to mourn, no timeline for when you should feel better or start moving on. The only way through it is to let yourself feel everything. The sadness, the anger, the love, and trust that over time, the sharp edges of the pain will soften. If there's one thing this experience has taught me, it's that respecting someone's grief is the greatest act of love. My mom and I struggled because she didn't understand that at first. She tried to rush me through my pain, to mold my healing into something that fit her expectations. But healing doesn't work that way. Sometimes, the best way to help someone move forward is simply to let them take their own time. To be present without trying to fix, to listen without offering solutions, and to trust that they'll find their way when they're ready. As I look toward the future, I feel a sense of hope I haven't felt in years. It's not the kind of hope that erases the past or promises a perfect tomorrow. It's quieter than that, a steady belief that life can be beautiful even when it's messy, that joy can coexist with sorrow, and that love doesn't end when someone is gone. Emily will always be a part of me. She shaped the person I am today, and her memory continues to guide me in ways I never expected. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. I'll carry her with me every step of the way. This is a new chapter, not one I ever wanted, but one I'm learning to embrace. And for the first time in a long time, I feel ready to turn the page.